I met my husband on a blind date, so we were set up by a mutual friend who had decided, despite me telling her I didn't want to date for a very, very long time, that this would be the perfect opportunity for her to set me up with her journalist, punk rocker friend. We met in a sushi restaurant in Brixton. I mean, I didn't really know what to expect because I knew he was from New Zealand. I thought I was going to get this beautiful home and away style blonde surfer, and instead I got this very shaven-headed, tattooed, broad-shouldered Kiwi. My name is Poorna Bell, and I'm the executive editor of the Huffington Post in the UK. Our relationship moved fairly quickly, which for myself is really unusual because actually I'm a commitment phobe. But he was so self-assured, he had absolute faith in our relationship and the way that he loved me. And the way that I loved him, it was just this perfect equilibrium of us being in the exact same place at the same time, and we wanted the same things. When I initially met him, I actually thought he was fairly easy to read and very simple because his interests were simple. So he loved books. He could sit with a book for hours and hours and not be bothered. He loved nature, so he loved bird watching, plants. But he also seemed to have a lot that he kept inside. We ended up getting engaged a year after we started dating. And when we got married, one of his friends said, "I'm so glad that you got together," because there were moments when we were really worried about him. And I didn't really probe that much further. I said, "Oh, how do you mean?" And they just said, he just seemed a bit lost. And I think they were hinting at being self-destructive, but they didn't really want to use that word.
As anybody who grew up in 1960s, 1970s England knows, emotion was not really on the table. It was all still, stiff upper lip stuff. I never saw my father cry or particularly show any kind of outward emotion. I think generally most teenage boys in the middle of the 70s were quite repressed in lots of ways. And for us, one of the only ways that we could escape that was to write about it and put it into the music. In fact, that was the only way because we didn't really have any of the tools to talk to each other about our feelings. This is Lol Tolhurst. You may remember me from many moons ago as the founding member of one of England's best bands, The Cure. We used to rehearse at Robert Smith's parents' house because they had built an extension onto the house that they thought they were going to use as a party room or something for family get-togethers, and we just moved the band in for 3 years and didn't leave. And that's where we wrote Boys Don't Cry.
I would say I'm sorry if I thought that it would change your mind, but I know that this time I have said too much, been too unkind.
That first year of us being married was hard. I mean, there's no shying away from it. But I didn't understand why his behaviour was changing. Rob increasingly was spending so much time in bed. He seemed to not be able to do the simplest of things. I wasn't really sure what was going on with him work-wise. He seemed extremely worried about money, but he just wasn't communicating any of this. And I remember asking repeatedly, is everything okay? You can talk to me. We're in a marriage. We're in this together. And the answer, it was the same refrain over and over again. No, it's fine, Honestly, I would say if something was wrong. He gradually pulled away from his friends and from his family. And I would ask him how he felt about that and just check in with him and see how he was doing. And the answer always would be, no, I'm fine. I'd say something if I wasn't fine. But of course he wasn't fine. And then in October 2013, it all just came out in this burst where he just told me that he had been a drug addict for the last 3 years, that he had a dual diagnosis, so he had also had depression. That unleashed so many emotions and so much hurt and sadness, I think, on my side that A, I had been lied to, and B, that he hadn't felt that he could talk to me about it. And the reason why he hadn't felt he could talk to me about it is because he had a massive problem with reconciling the things that a man should be, the ideal of what a man should be, with what he had actually become.
I try to laugh about, cover it all up with lies. I try to laugh about, hiding the tears from my eyes, 'cause boys don't cry.
No Cure song was ever written the same way twice. We've never had a method. You know, what we would do was 3 times a week, we would go to Robert's house for about 3 or 4 hours in the evening, and we would just, pick up where we left off. So maybe one of us had an idea the week before, maybe about a song title or something, or a little bit of music, or Robert had something that he'd done. The Smiths used to have this old Hammond organ in their house that had a little tape recorder in, and Robert would sit there in the evening sometimes when we weren't there and just record little ideas. So I imagined that we sat at Robert's house, and maybe Robert had the idea for the chord structure, and maybe had it fully formed. I can't actually remember, to be honest, but I do remember sitting there and playing along, and then thinking, there's the bit where the guitar has a sort of retardo, where it's like where it's sort of slowed down a little bit. And I thought, I can do something with that with the drums. I can put, some kind of pattern over the top of it, which became the sort of little circular hook thing that goes back into the rest of the song. It's a bit at the end of each chorus where it goes, and boys don't cry, and it goes bam 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 bam, and that's the part which I think is like a sort of unintentional hook, but it works very well. It's a bit that people remember a lot of the time, because I see them mouthing it in the audience if I've played it, So I think, we just played it, and Michael would have come up with a nice sympathetic bass line, and we played it until it came out as the song that we liked. And it was one of the 4 songs we put on the demo that actually got us a long-term record deal with Fiction Records and Chris Parry.
I'm Rhodri Jones. I'm from South Wales originally. My years in primary school, typically Welsh in that your sort of guiding principles come from a sort of chapel community, and then your rugby club. There was certainly some sense men don't show emotions. I don't think it was ever an idea that was forced upon you, but you picked it up implicitly. But certainly I never saw grown men cry, and I guess I thought at least that I shouldn't either. I suppose it has that bit of something about a teenager lying in the bed, trying to think about what this all sort of means, making sense of things, but also a teenager jumping around the room and on the bed probably, dancing around to what's essentially a great pop song. I probably couldn't give you an exact definition of what the middle eight is, but for me it does something that raises the song above just being another song about love or another pop song. You've got in the verse before, he says, I would tell you that I loved you if I thought that you would stay. That sense of, he seems to have either given up too easily, or maybe he's saying, well, really, I'm not really that bothered, but if I wanted you to stay, I would tell you that I loved you. But when he gets to the middle eight, he does wish that he'd been different with that, misjudged your limit, pushed you too far, took you for granted. And that last line, there's something in that, I think, where he says, I thought that you needed me more. And that repetition of more suggests he is actually affected, and he does really feel it, and he does want this girl. I think there's something that changes from that more to the line of the next verse when he says, now I would do most anything. And that movement from more to now, that with the music, I don't know, it does something to me even when I hear it now.
Misjudge your limit, pushed you too far, took you for granted, thought that you did every mama, now I would do most anything.
I think he was unable to cry for most of our relationship. I mean, when we got married, I did joke about him crying when he saw me walking up the aisle. He didn't cry then, and that's fine. And I didn't either. But during the subsequent years when we went through a lot together, so this was between his depression, when he admitted that he had a problem with addiction, he could never, even in the lowest of his moments, I never really saw him cry. And it really was only when he spent his first stay in a psychiatric hospital that I think that he was given the means to access some of the emotions that he'd been feeling and be able to articulate that. And once he started crying, he found it really difficult to stop. It just seemed to absolutely overwhelm him.
I would break down at your feet and beg forgiveness, plead with you. But I know that it's too late. There's nothing I can do.
Everything that we're talking about is about changing conversations. And this song in particular is a song that we always assumed was an upbeat song. And then when you look closer, and you look at the lyrics and you look at how poignant and how desperate they are and how that reflects how so many men feel about themselves, the desperation around how they really feel about themselves inside and this facade that they have to put on. I think it's just a beautiful capture of where we are as a society when it comes to modern day masculinity.
What's very interesting about Boys Don't Cry is it's a song that is actually about something the reverse of what the title is, because it is about boys crying. It's not about you being very macho and hard and not being able to express yourself. It's about having feelings, and if anything, the Cure are totally responsible, in my mind, for boys especially being able to get close to their emotions and their feelings. Whether we were doing something poppy like Boys Don't Cry or whether we're doing something more cerebral and dark later on, that's the point in people's life that we spoke to, that point where you go from being a kid, a teenager, into an adult, which is a very difficult time in your life.
The last relapse that he had, it was complex because he was supposed to maintain his recovery so that we could start trying for children. And he lied about the fact that he had relapsed. And so we went through a trial separation. And I think at the end of it, because he had gone to New Zealand to spend time with his family, and at the end of that, I knew pretty much he was drinking when he was out there. And also I think I had reached the end of the road in which I could trust him, unfortunately. So it was the hardest lesson to learn, that unfortunately love does not save the day, and it doesn't fix the problems in your relationship. I didn't want there to come a time when I wouldn't want the best for him and when I wouldn't want him to prioritise his recovery above everything else. So I just said to him, I'm really sorry, Rob, but I don't think that we can work this out.
I try to laugh about it, covering all of the lies.
Initially, he displayed some of that stupendous emotional intelligence. He understood exactly what my reasons were. He was amazing around it, and absolved some of my guilt around it. But he then yo-yoed between just his mood, his detox, which he was supposed to be going to. And then about a week later, after I had that conversation with him, he was sending really odd, really cryptic messages. I mean, it didn't sound like him at all. It actually sounded like I wouldn't say a stranger, but more like a robot, someone who is talking through the mouth of a person that I just don't recognise. And then after about, 12 hours of him going missing, and we just didn't know where he was, his parents were worried sick, the police eventually found him, and then we were told he had taken his own life.
I would do most anything to get you back on my side, but I just keep on laughing. hiding the tears from my eyes.
I think his inability to express his emotions came from the same well that every man, unfortunately, shares that same inability to cry. So we don't have a society and we don't have a structure that gives permission for that. They're not given permission to do that because the admission that there is something so bad that it's caused you to become emotional means that you weren't man enough to deal with it or to internalize it. That muzzle that creates for you is just, I mean, it's utterly toxic.
Boys don't cry. Boys don't cry.
One of the things that sport does to you, you don't tend to show your emotions. You're kind of conditioned not to show your emotions and put that game face on. My name's Derek Redmond, former British, European, Commonwealth champion and two-time Olympian. I was one of the favourites to win a medal in Barcelona in '92. There were 4 rounds to the final. I won the first round, I won the second round, and in the third round, which was the semi-final.
Now comes the test. He's had these injury worries. Are his legs standing up to it? Can he go close to his own British record of 44.5? He just might have to. And away they go for the first of these men's 400-metre semi-finals here at the Olympic Stadium. Ismail of Qatar has gone out very quickly, but Redmond also going well inside him.
So halfway down the back straight, I heard a funny sound first, and then I felt this horrible pain and realised I pulled a hamstring.
But Redmond pulls up, the tendon's gone, Redmond is out. Redmond is out of the Olympics. Disaster for Derek Redmond.
I decided to get up and start running again to see whether I could catch the other athletes that were in the race, and I sort of hobbled to 200-metre mark to see where they were, and they had already finished, and I decided that I was going to finish this race if it was the last race that I ever run, which incidentally it was.
And he's got up and courageously he's hopping around the remaining 300 metres of the track to the applause of the crowd. He has definitely hurt his hamstring, I believe. I don't think it's his Achilles tendon, and he just wants to finish the race because he knows this is maybe his last Olympic Games.
I hobbled around the top bend, and during this time I had quite a lot of officials and track referees and medical staff trying to stop me and get me off of the track, and I dodged my way past them and continued to hobble around the track.
And he is distressed, he's moved. There's an official who's followed him, trying to stop him limp because he's doing himself more damage.
Then with 100 metres to go, I heard a familiar voice, someone calling out my name and saying, "You don't need to do this," and I turned around and realised it was my dad. And as we started down the home straight, I completely lost it and burst into tears and was sort of saying things like, "I can't believe this has happened to me." And my dad was sort of saying, "Well, look, you know, you've got nothing to prove, you're a champion in our eyes." And I just couldn't believe it. I was beside myself. My world had sort of come apart because yet again, at another Olympic Games, I had succumbed to injury, and I ended up finishing the race and looked up at the screen and it had Derek Redmond 8th place, disqualified.
He's in tears, and I really can't express my own personal anguish, my emotion for this poor chap, because he looked fantastic in the earlier round. Everyone believed he could break his own British record.
The fact that my dad was on the track with me in an Olympic semi-final with 100 metres to go, the reality struck him that it was all over and I wasn't going to get through to the final. I forgot about the crowd, relaxed, and just all the emotions came out and I couldn't keep them in anymore.
Hi, my name is Sara Pacella, and I'm a writer and mother to girl-boy twins. I wasn't really exposed to The Cure until I met my husband, when I fell in love with him and the band at the same time. When we moved in together, we acquired his Cure Boys Don't Cry poster. The poster is really big. It takes up about half a wall, and it has Robert standing with his hair in his traditional Robert Smith spikes. He's got his white running shoes on and he's facing away, so you can't see his face. You can see the back of him. And in giant letters, it says "Boys Don't Cry" on it. When I found out I was having twins, the only room that logically worked as a nursery was the room that had the Boys Don't Cry poster, which we put directly above my son's crib. Then when he got to be about 2.5 years old, as his imagination was developing, he'd talk about the shadow man and the man in the wall, complain about a man in the closet, but there's no closet in that room, so we were having trouble understanding because he was just a toddler. So we eventually figured out that it must be the poster. It really impacted his sleep. He was later falling asleep at night. He'd wake up, he'd see the poster, and he'd panic. And again, with us putting in things to help keep him calm, like night lights, it made the poster look even more menacing. So he'd fall asleep, wake up, see the menacing shadow of Robert Smith, and panic. And then wake up the entire house and everyone was having trouble sleeping. We decided we were going to take down the poster. My son is a big fan of the song Boys Don't Cry, which is kind of funny because of the poster. And I don't think that he, even now that he's almost 6 years old, has made the connection between the poster and the song.
The first single, of course, was 10:15 and Killing Arab. And Killing Arab is actually about, it's not about killing anybody. And it's completely as far away from any kind of racism as you could get to. But unfortunately, some people had got the wrong idea, which was like a bunch of National Front skinheads, and they turned up to see us play expecting some kind of sort of oi skinhead band. And then they were a little bit bemused when we walked out on stage with, Robert had this sort of floppy fringe like Tom Verlaine, and I had this sort of halfway afro. And there was one particular fellow who seemed to be like the leader of this group of skinheads, who had had his shirt off and had a huge great eagle tattooed across his chest. So that's his name as far as I'm concerned. Eagle was always his name. I'm sure it was probably something like Reginald, really. But so Eagle, was at the front of all these skinheads, and we came on, and they all looked at us a little bit suspiciously, and we started off our set playing Boys Don't Cry. It got to Eagle. Eagle liked it. In fact, he loved it. And as the rest of them, were sort of lurking behind their leader, looking for the signal to, start dismembering us, he started clapping his hands together and dancing to it, doing this sort of skinhead moon stomp thing to it. And they had to join in because he was the boss, And so that shows you the power of music. It kind of saved our lives a little bit then.
I'm Jeffrey Axt, and I'm a huge Cure fan from back in the day. 1986, July 14th. I recalled wanting to go to the Cure concert. I was a huge alternative music junkie. Couldn't afford the better seats, but I saw her, and we were close by and started to chat. There was dancing and drinking and drinking and drinking and dancing, and we just hit it off. I kind of got that feeling that she's something special, she's somebody special, and then I quickly dismissed it because I was a confirmed bachelor back then. As they do at all the concerts, there were T-shirts and posters and so forth, and she bought a poster for me, and when I asked her for a number, she jotted her phone number on the poster, on the back of the poster. And I thought that was cool. I was a bit smitten. I was drunk, and I came home, and I hid the poster because the one thing that I wanted to do, and the thing that I recalled, was that I met this girl and I had her number. So I literally hid it in the basement in the storage room. And the next day, it was a fog, except I met the girl and I knew that I had her number, and I didn't remember going into the basement. And the longer the days went on, I just kept getting frustrated. I actually went back to the concert venue thinking that I had left it there. Did anybody leave a poster? I kept trying to chalk it off to, it was another girl, but this one was special, so I could never shake it completely loose from my head. Months later, I found the poster in my basement. So I immediately called her when I found the poster, and this was maybe 3 or 4 months later. And she thought I was just a liar at that point, to be honest. So she reluctantly agreed to meet, and we then scheduled a date and picked up right where we left off. I was thrilled, and we dated for a long period of time after that, and we ended up getting married and bought a house. My wife got pregnant, but I was determined to put that poster up on that wall, and that was how we started off and met. So I couldn't find the poster again. And to the outside world, people would probably think that, God, I'm not responsible, especially with a symbolic thing like this poster. I keep losing it. So I was on the mission to find this poster, and I think I had to Google search for pictures, and the picture of this poster came up, and Sara had it on her wall, and she was a blogger out of Canada, and her story was that her son was petrified of the poster, and so this poster had to come down. So I thought this was it, and I emailed her through the blog site and told her a brief synopsis of the story, and since she needed to take the poster down, I was willing to buy it from her, and she agreed if I told my story. So the story ended up on her blog. Now, years and years later, when Wolfgang cries or he's having a fussy moment, I point to that poster and I say, see, boys don't cry. And as he's getting older, he is reciting Boys Don't Cry. So it's transitioned into 2017 just nicely.
Where we were growing up on the southern edge of London was a much more hard scrabble kind of dark and dour place. It's funny because I recently, I'm living out here in sunny California for the last quarter of a century. I recently got on the computer and had a look, as you can, on the maps and walk up and down streets that I grew up on, and I contacted Robert and I said, my goodness, I look at all these streets that we grew up on and we walked down as teenagers, and to me now, in retrospect, it's absolutely no mistake that we made the kind of music that we did, because it just sounds like where we lived. And, that was our only emotional release, to be able to put what we saw into music and words.